Welcome to live show. Hang on, I've got to put my headphones on. Welcome to live show 132, streaming straight from Minsk, Belarus. I'm Dave, and tonight we're diving into the unfiltered truth about Ukraine conflict with the journalist who's been there, Patrik Baab. From the front lines of the Donbass to NATO-backed cities in Western Ukraine, Baab's fearless reporting in his best-selling book, I'm going to butcher this because it's in German, beiden, Seiten der Front, exposes the lies of the Western media and NATO's dangerous role. This book. Oh, no, sorry, that book. There. That way. I'm lost. That's it, that way. Sorry about that. And he's faced censorship and backlash, yet keeps challenging the narrative. Please check out Patrik's website, his Telegram channel, his X account, and the addresses are in the description below. And you can also buy his book, the one you can just see on the screen, on Amazon, and that link is also in the description below. I must also mention he's writing a new book, and that is going to be highly anticipated. Friday was May 9th, and the 80th anniversary victory parade was held in Minsk, and you can see that on our channels, with over 23,000 so far watching on Rumble and nearly 6,000 on YouTube. There you go and have a look at that. And today in Belarus, it celebrates the day of the national flag, national emblem, and the national anthem, with celebrations all across the country. So there you go, there's a bit of Belarus news. Oops, that's the book again. Definitely need a producer. Anyway, whether you're joining us at 8 p.m. here in Minsk, 7 p.m. in Berlin, 6 p.m. in London, 1 p.m. in New York, or 4 a.m. in Sydney, get ready for a conversation that cuts through the propaganda. Share the stream, subscribe, hit the thumbs up, and let's get started with Patrik. I hope you're going to enjoy this. What drove you to challenge the mainstream narrative on Ukraine, knowing the professional risks like losing your teaching positions?
Well, that's a long story. In the year 1997, I changed my employer, and I worked up from that time at North German Public Broadcaster. And they sent me, they had a magazine called Baltic Magazine, which covers political and cultural events around the Baltic Sea. And they sent me to Russia, to Baltic states, to Scandinavia, Poland, and so on. And so I had some experience in those countries, especially in Russia. And up from 2014, after the coup of the Maidan, I felt deeply that the coverage of the Western media didn't compare to the reality I learned and I saw and I experienced in those countries. But I had sources on my own in Ukraine and in Russia, and I activated those sources. I want to make me a clear picture on the ground. And my first journey led me to the western part of Ukraine, to the Carpathians region, where I knew farmers, and I lived with them. And they introduced me to a lot of people, to soldiers, to other farmers, to smugglers, and so on, and to workers, workmen, drivers, and so on. And I discussed with those people, I lived with them, and I got in touch to another reality, which was completely different to the media reality Western media created. And at the first moment, I didn't know that they were aware of me. I thought I could do my investigations also in the Donbass, but they denounced me as a poll watcher of Mr. Putin, who I never was. I never was a poll watcher. I just had my accreditations on the ground and talked to people. And well, in September 2022, we learned in Moscow, both journalists, we learned in Moscow that the Kremlin was planning a referendum in the four oblasts, Cherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Lugansk. And we visited and talked to people at the polling stations. And so Western press had a clear dementi, but they wanted to have a scandal. And they scandalized my being there. That was the point. So I got under the wheels of Western propaganda media. And I described that in my book. Excuse me. So I described it in my book on both sides of the front line. And I felt that this war in Ukraine, as all wars, has three levels. The one is the military fight on the ground. The second level is the economic battle, the economic war worldwide against the Russian Federation. And the third level is the propaganda war. And I became into the propaganda war. I got into the propaganda war.
Mm-hmm. I've just got a follow-up question here. Can you share a specific moment in your career when you realized the mainstream narrative was misleading?
Sorry, please repeat. I didn't understand.
Was there a specific moment in your career that you realized the mainstream narrative and the mainstream media was misleading?
So I knew the mechanism because I worked for 40 years for public broadcasters in Germany. And I knew the mechanism in directing the freelancers, framing topics and all that. And it went on step by step. Putin was demonized. The Russian Federation, everything was bad. And it went step. But this was not the reality. It was not a special event or something. I always reported on Russia in an investigative way. I showed directly on my own the problems of the Russian Federation, the criminality over there, the right extremists in Russia, the illegal oil transports, everything. These were stories of my own. But now I had to say this Ukraine war is a media war, and we have to define, firstly, the character of this war. And this is a war between the United States of America and the Russian Federation on Ukraine's soil. And Ukraine is just a tool who now failed to be successful. And Ukraine people has been brought and will be brought to the butcher as a sacrifice. We deliver the weapons, you deliver the bodies. This shows the cynical character of this war. And we have to realize that. And Western propaganda media don't.
How was your experience covering NATO involved conflicts like Afghanistan, informing your view on their role in Ukraine?
I was in Afghanistan in 2001 or 2002, I can't remember exactly. And I made an interview with the head of the government, Hamid Karzai. And going to the palace of Karzai, I saw that he was under security by US by US groups of Blackwater. He was under complete surveillance of Blackwater. And going to the palace by car means you have to surround the tank blockings.
Mm-hmm.
And everywhere you looked into machine guns and cannons. So I saw that this was not an Afghan regime, it was an American regime. And we went out of this area, we cruised around through the country, and one day I met in the outskirts of Kabul a man of my age. And he told me that he was the grandson of a teacher of the first German high school in Kabul, founded in the year 1908. And so we had a common ground, and we started the discussion. And he told me, the Taliban are everywhere here. I know them, but you can't see that. You're a Western guy. You have not the eyes to see that. And so it was very clear that reality on the ground in Afghanistan was completely different to the propaganda narratives in NATO countries. And I tried to apply that to Ukraine as well.
Mm-hmm. You've emphasized, sorry about my Latin, auditor et altera pars. How do you apply this principle when reporting on a conflict where Western media overwhelmingly supports one side?
Yes, this is Latin and means you always have to hear the other side. You always have both sides. And this is, in journalism, a leading principle. You can't follow one narrative. This is propaganda, this is not journalism. You always have to hear both sides. And this is something I did. I talked to the people in Western Ukraine, and I have to say, I don't talk mostly to the people who are running a country. I'm talking to people who are working in a country, and that's a difference. Mm-hmm. My coverage is not top-down, it is bottom-up. And now they have a complete different perspective, a complete different point of view. And so I worked in the western part of Ukraine, and I had the idea with my friends over there, who were farmers, in the upcoming year to go to Donbass. But then the war broke out. The Russian invasion came up, and it was impossible to go through the front line. So I had to make decisions, and I decided to go in from the Russian side. The same principle. I don't talk to the bosses. I'm talking to the workmen, to the soldiers, to the militias, to the normal people, to the women who have children, to the teachers, and all, to the retired people. And so you get a complete other perspective, a complete other point of view. And I can tell you, on both sides of the front line, those people want peace, nothing else. People want peace. It's the bosses who want to continue the war. That's the
Your court victory against Kyle University was a win for press freedom. How has it shaped your resolve to report from places like the Donbass? And a follow-up, did the backlash from German institutions change how you approach controversial assignments like the Donbass?
It hadn't any influence on me. I won this fight at the court, but it doesn't change everything. I lost my teaching assignment, but they won't give me a new one. It was just terminated from semester to semester, so they won't give me a new teaching assignment. And They awoke my fighting spirit. That was the point. I continued working, and I continued to make it public. And if you read my book, it is full of fighting spirit. It's published in German language and in Russian language. And they couldn't really touch me because I'm retired, I have my money, they cannot do anything harm to me. So I kept on working. And I made interviews to inform people in Germany about the real situation. Because people are underestimating the strength of the Russian Federation. They know nothing in Germany about the real reasons and the causes of this war, because German media don't cover it.
As a political scientist and journalist, how do you see NATO's eastward expansion contributing to the tensions that led to the Ukraine conflict?
Absolutely. According to the American scientist John J. Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago, this is the main reason for the Ukraine war. The main reason for the Ukraine war is the eastward expansion of NATO. And I completely agree. And Putin presented that as one main reason to start the invasion. Ukraine must be neutral. This was his first demand. The second one is the Russian people in Donbass must live in security. And we need a regime change in Kiev, the so-called denazification of Kiev. These are the 3 points. And we have to keep in mind that this war started not on February 24, 2022. This war started in February 2014 with the Western orchestrated coup on the Maidan, who led to a regime change in Ukraine. And in the following weeks, a wave of violence rode through the whole country against people of Russian origin. There were fires like in the Union House in Odessa, in Mariupol, the neo-Nazi brigade of Azov rolled into a crowd with tanks. Many people were killed. This was on May 14. Oh, excuse me, at May 8, 2014. Many cases in Zaporozhye and Cherson as well. And this is unforgotten in those areas. And after that, in the eastern part of the country, people founded self-defense units together with the policemen on the ground and the militia on the ground. This was the way to get weapons for them. And they occupied the administration buildings and so on. And then the coup government in Kiev started the so-called anti-terror operation against civilians in the Donbass. And in 8 years, those people saw that more than 14,000 people were killed, according to international organizations. So, and this is the first stage of the war. It was the first time of this war. And the two republics, Lugansk and Donetsk, the two oblasts, separated from the central government in Kiev. And this fits international law. It is not forbidden by the Charter of the United Nations to separate against the will of the central government. It's not forbidden.
Why did you feel it was critical to report from Russian-held Donbass in 2022 when most Western journalists avoided those areas? And what did you hope to uncover in the Donbass you couldn't find through Western media reports?
Well, I have to say, normally media go in when on the ground you may start with a conflict. But I observed that Western media went out of Donbass when the war began in 2014. That means they did not want to see what's happening on the ground. They didn't want to see because they were not interested to see that. It was not in the interest of NATO countries and of Western media. And somebody has to do the job. So it's a dangerous job. We were under fire in our hotel. The city of Donetsk were under fire. We saw the front line in a ceasefire time. And I saw the completely destroyed city of Mariupol after Russian troops stormed Mariupol. So the city was destroyed to, I think, at an amount of 80%. And people lived in basements and all that. But it is important to do that. It's a job as a journalist to report from those areas. And I was very surprised that people who were under hard artillery fire some weeks ago welcomed the Russian troops. They said, at the side of the Russian Federation, we will find a way to peace. And this is the only way, because we were under fire and under repression from the Ukraine side for such a long time. That was surprising for me, but it is completely understandable if you keep in mind the history of the conflict. And you have to keep in mind that those areas were attached to the Soviet Union of Ukraine in the year 1922. Those areas were originally Russian areas from the Tsarist Empire. And people over there feel Russian. They feel very close to Russian. All those families have relatives in Russia. They are very close. And a lot of things were surprising for me. And I found out that that the reality on the ground were completely different to Western media coverage.
Was there any memorable interaction with any of the Donbass residents that revealed their perspective on the conflict and Russia's presence?
Well, this is my way of investigating, to speak to people, to come into conversations with normal people. I have normally, in preparing such investigations, two investigation levels. The first level is the official one. You need visa, accreditations, military permissions, all that. And I'm trying to do it accurately, as good as I can. And the second level is an unofficial level. I have sources on the ground before starting my job, because I know people for years. I'm working in Russia for 25 years, so I know people. And I have sources on the ground, I have supporters on the ground, drivers and all that. And I'm going to mobilize those people before going in. And so I'm always in touch to normal people. retired people, workmen, drivers, soldiers, and so on. And this is covered up from the official side. No officer, no member of the administration in Donetsk or Lugansk know to whom I'm talking. But I do. And so I think I can get a clear picture of things that happen over there.
You saw the war's impact in places like Mariupol. How did the reality on the ground compare to Western media portrayals of Russian-controlled areas? And can you describe any specific detail in Mariupol that Western reports exaggerated or omitted?
In one point, Western media are completely right. This city was completely destroyed. So I saw that. I think it was destroyed to an amount of 80%. And when I saw this city, I was shocked. And I thought that many thousand civilians must have been killed. But it was not. 2 years later, I was over there, and friends told me that possibly 5,000 dead civilians, which is a lot. And body count doesn't bring anybody back into life. That's very clear. And the United Nations reckon the complete amount of dead civilians at the end of last year with 20,000. I think we will have much more in the end of war. But you can say, whatever the Russian Federation wants to do, it is not a war against the civil population. And when I had my conversations on the ground, many people, the majority of people, told me, we are happy that the Russian army came in. We feel liberated because we were under pressure of the Ukraine administration, the militias, the military for such a long time. In difference to media coverage in the West, people don't feel suppressed by the Russian army. They feel liberated by the Russian army. And you can create loyalty, and for that, the Kremlin made the right steps. They brought the income, the retired people, to the Russian level, which means more than double as high. And the reconstruction of cities like Mariupol, who started at once, created jobs for young people. And now the Donbass, it sounds crazy, but it is. The Donbass now is a territory of immigrants. People are coming back and coming in because they are getting jobs. And there's so many apartment houses who are under construction and will be reconstructed. And the first buildings that were reconstructed by the Russian authorities were the schools. When I was in Donbass, in Mariupol, in October 2024, all schools were reconstructed or new built. And that's a good sign. That's a sign to the people in the Donbass. We do something for you, we help you, be loyal. And this is a sign for NATO country governments as well. What we have will we not give back. These regions will stay Russian territory. And this is what Putin said. Every peace talk has to recognize the reality on the ground. On this basis, we can discuss a ceasefire, and a long-term peace. And this is the only way, from my point of view, to cut a deal. You have to accept the reality on the ground. And it means those 4 oblasts will stay Russian territory.
Did the locals in the Donbass describe their experiences with the conflict since 2014, particularly regarding Ukraine's actions in the region?
Yes. We have to separate 2 parts. First, the separated republics of Lugansk and Donetsk, and on the other hand, Cherson, Zaporozhye, and the southern part of Donetsk, who was Ukrainian soil. In the 2 separated republics, the civilians were under fire since 2014. They lost children, they lost their houses. I saw these areas and, well, the water supply was cut every day. You got water for 2 or 3 hours, and then the show was over. Same thing with electricity. And those people told me, we were also Ukrainians. Why did they shoot on us? Why did they want to kill us? And this is a result of the Nazi regime in Kiev since the coup in 2014. They wanted to do an ethnical cleansing of the eastern part of the country. They wanted to press Russian people out of Ukraine. And this is what I was told in those areas. And this was a reason for resistance, and this was a reason to tell me, well, Putin came too late. He should have helped us in the year 2014. He came 8 years too late. But now we are happy that he's here. And the second part of my answer is, let's have a view on the republics, Zaporozhye and Cherson. These regions were Ukrainian territory until 2022. And when I visited these areas, people told me we were under pressure by Ukrainian authorities all the time for 8 years. It was not allowed to speak the Russian language. We were detained for no reason. We were accused. We were sometimes beaten. I spoke to an older man. He said, I was beaten. I lost 2 teeth. And this is not forgotten. And those people say, we are happy that the Russians came in. I met a man of my age in Melitopol during dinner. It was a crazy situation. I know him. I sat next to him, but I didn't know him. So we came into a conversation, and he told me, now I'm happy that the Russians are here. Most of my family is living in on the western side of the Dnieper. And we have to free them in the future as well. We have to free our family on the other side, on the western side of the Dnieper. This is our task. And that's the meaning of the people. It's completely different to media coverage in the West. The Western media don't want to understand that those people feel close to Russia. And in the perspective of those people, everything bad came from the West. The First World War, the Russian Civil War, the Polish-Soviet War in 2019, 1920, the Second World War, the Cold War, the breaking down of the economy, everything in the minds of those people, everything bad came from the West.
You've noted the lack of Western sanctions impacts in places like Rostov-on-Don. What did this reveal about Russia's resilience in the region?
I can tell you there is no visible impact of the sanctions. And I saw and experienced that the Russian Federation is very resilient. The Russian Federation faces a economic growth of 3 to 4% a year. And Europe is in a decline because of the sanctions backfire. And there is nothing in Western Europe what the Russian Federation would need. They make their business with Asia and China and India. And the pivot to Asia was very successful. The Russian built new pipelines to China, new railways between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, new railway tracks to Iran. When I visited St. Petersburg last year, I saw 2 brand new nuclear breakers. And the Russians want to make all year round the northern route open for oil vessels and gas vessels. And this will shorten the transport route and makes the transport cheaper. So in the end of the show, Europe will be the backyard of the United States and the backyard of Russia as well. The Russians have, due to the sanctions, problems with connectivity, because the distances of delivering cars is getting much longer. And so the buyers have to change from German to Chinese cars. But in the end of the show, those cars are cheaper and they are as good as German cars. So they will never come back to German products.
It's the same in Minsk here as well, in Belarus.
Absolutely, yes. And so the Western politicians underestimated the resilience of the Russian Federation because they know nothing from Russia. They have no experience, they have no idea of the economic force of Russia and the economic power of Russia. And so they wanted to continue, and they want to continue Ukraine war because they thought it was easygoing in Ukraine. They thought they could win the war, and they underestimated the enemy. And this is the worst mistake you can make.
How did you manage the logistical and ethical challenges of reporting from Russian-administered areas without compromising your journalistic integrity? Was there any moments in the Donbass where you felt your independence was tested?
Well, I was detained several times, and partly I was imprisoned. I was interviewed for hours, 3 to 4 hours. But it is not the first time I'm in a war zone, so I could manage that. But I have to say, the show is open. You don't know how it will end. And in a war zone where thousands of people came to death, were killed, one more guy from Germany doesn't matter. Probably, I don't know if they would report something. I've no idea. And what I'm doing is I'm speaking always to normal people. And then you will hear other stories. And well, I was detained, yes, several times, but they never tried to influence my coverage. They never tried to force me to say anything. I was never under surveillance. I had no shadow at all. The problem was to get in, and the problem is always to get around the checkpoints. Stop, get out of the car, open everything. What is in that bag? Oh, that's very clear. But if you manage to come around, you have open access to everybody. I could talk to soldiers, I could talk to restaurant owners, all that. It was, well, and they told me their opinion. They were very interested. Those people are very interested. Oh, where do you come from? From Germany? Let's talk a bit. I found open arms everywhere. So I talked to people, and this is the best way to make a reporting of your own.
What did you observe about the 2022 referenda in Donbass that Western media might have misrepresented or overlooked? And can you share any example of how the locals described their participation in that referendum?
According to Western media, the voters were brought to the polling stations forced by trigger-happy soldiers with machine guns and assault rifles. And on the ground, I made a complete different experience. Older lady prayed to God in front of the polling stations. Young soldiers had tears in their eyes. There were long queues in front of the polling stations. People wanted to vote. They wanted to vote for Russia, which means in the eyes of those people, for the end of the war at the side of a strong partner. And I'm convinced that the result of those referendums were reliable. It was the truth because it expressed the mood of those people. But the voting process didn't fit and align Western standards. In many polling stations, a secret voting was not possible. People did it open. Only in a few polling stations, you had cabins to make your cross secretly. So, although the voting process didn't fit Western standards and international and democratic standards, I think the result expresses the mood of the people.
I'd like to get to your experiences in Western Ukraine now. In 2021, what signs did you see in Western Ukraine of NATO's growing influence, militarily or politically, before the invasion?
It started with the arrival at the airport in Lviv. We took our luggage, came out in the airport hall, and I saw a soldier with a plate. NATO, come up here. And he stood there to receive a group of NATO instructors. I think there were British or American instructors. This was the first experience I made over there. And when I was underway in the Carpathian region, there is 200 kilometers eastward Kursk, a huge natural park at the Romanian border. And I talked to the farmers, and they told me, this is the area where the Americans bring in the weapons. I couldn't believe that. Later, I felt it very clear, because you have in this area huge old trees. And the satellite surveillance cannot look to the ground. So it's the best possibility to bring in weapons. And later on, I read the interview of the former American Foreign Secretary, Antony Blinken, in the New York Times magazine. And he confirmed that the United States brought in secretly in September and December 2023 a lot of weapons into Ukraine to enforce the Ukraine troops against Russia. So they waited for the war, and they brought in secretly weapons. And that must have been over there, exactly over there.
How did Western Ukrainians' views on Russia and the Donbass conflict in 2021 reflect the impact of Western-backed narratives?
So it was a kind of double bind. So people told me, we don't want to have a war with Russia, not interested. We have to work, we have to build our houses, we have to educate our children. And many people over there were working abroad, in Western countries to make money, and in Russia as well, because there is no language barrier. And you couldn't find a good job in Ukraine itself, so they worked abroad. And somebody who works abroad is not interested in a war, because he is interested in free traveling. But many people in Ukraine already aligned with Nazi ideology, because they heard that in schools, in everyday life. In Lviv, there were every year big marches of neo-Nazis, meetings, and so on, camps for school children. Azov is not only a military brigade, Azov is also a social movement with camps for school children as well. So the government, the coup government, tried more and more to bring people in Ukraine close to this neo-Nazi ideology. That's what I saw. But, well, I have to say, the farmers over there, the drivers, the workers in the wood, they were so busy to make money because they earn not much. That means they have to work hard. They were busy all day, and the farmers as well. They are busy all day. So they don't read newspapers. They hear a bit radio or watch a bit TV, and that's all.
Did you encounter any other evidence in Western Ukraine of preparations for escalation with Russia, such as NATO training or equipment? Besides,
yes, NATO training, NATO people on the ground, bringing in NATO equipment. That's what I told you.
Yeah.
Not more.
Yeah.
And well, I know many sons of farmers joined the militia because the militia and the army paid good money. They could earn more money as they did on the farm. This is a reason to join the militia and the military groups. It's a question of survival. Many things in Western Ukraine, in these poor regions, are questions of survival. Working abroad, go into smuggling of cigarettes, joining the militias. This is a question of survival over there.
On the war's potential end, given NATO's deep involvement, what do you see as the biggest barriers to the peace deal that respects the realities on the ground in the Donbass?
Well, the Trump administration will get rid of this war and this conflict. They try to get rid of this conflict. But I'm unsure if they will succeed, because they have so many opponents. The biggest problem are the Ukraine Nazis in the security apparatus, in the secret service, in the army, and in the administration. And they have surrounded President Zelensky. And the political survival of those people depends on the continuing of the war. That makes things difficult. And they can't block the peace process by making provocations against the Russian Federation and so on. The second adversary is Western Europe. Western Europe politicians want to continue the war because they maneuvered their own countries into a dead end. They thought this war would be easygoing. But as a result of this war, their own countries are in an economic decline. So normally, as a politician, you should overtake responsibility and step back. But they won't do that. So they are pressing their own countries deeper and deeper into this war. And they are playing with fire. And now they want to wait after Donald Trump's show in the United States is over. They want to surpass Donald Trump the next 4 years in the hope that after Trump, a new democratic president will take office and continue the war. So they can help their big brothers and go on fighting. And the third adversary of the Trump administration is sitting in the administration itself. The Pentagon, the Foreign Office, all administrations in the United States are filled up with neocons who think we have to come back to a unipolar world with one hegemon called the United States. And the Trump administration made clear that there is no way back. We are living in a multipolar world with different centers of power, like Moscow and Peking as well, as Beijing. But a new president can bring in, let me say, 1,000 or 1,500 people for all administrations. And the apparatus, the men and women inside the administration, will go on working. And what we see right now is that President Trump is changing his mind step by step. Step by step. He had possibly the power to stop this war. He presented a 7-point plan that Crimea stays Russian, the 4 oblasts stays Russian, direct negotiations at the negotiation table, neutral Ukraine. And I think this is the only way, the only possible way to peace. But now Trump allows Germany to deliver long-range missiles. What is that? It's just the contrary of the 7-point plan. And I think he will go back, he will go back from his own goals. He cannot reach that. I think the Trump administration will fail in cutting a deal in Ukraine.
And you've cited the sabotage of the 2022 Istanbul talks. What role do you think Western powers, particularly the US, will play in any future negotiations?
Well, I said,
Trump could have just walked away and said it wasn't his war if he'd done it earlier, I think.
Well, I said this is an American war against the Federation on Ukraine soil, and the only way to cut a deal is direct negotiations between Trump and Putin. And they have to force the Europeans in line. And they have to force Zelensky to step back and to organize new elections in Ukraine. This is the only way to come to a peace deal. But I'm very skeptical if that will happen. So the Europeans will continue the war, and this is very, very risky because the way of fighting of the Russian army is completely different to that what Western European armies or Western armies do. Western armies are looking and gaining and going for territories. And the Russian army has territory enough. The Russians are waiting for the enemy to destroy him. And so they are waiting and waiting and waiting. And at some point, they are firing back with all guns. And I fear this point will come up soon.
How might Russia's position in the Donbass and Crimea shape the terms of the potential resolution based on what you've witnessed?
That's what I said. It is impossible for the Ukraine, also with European support, to conquer the Russian occupied territory. It's just impossible. I saw the so-called Surovikin lines against tanks from the West. I saw the minefields, and I can tell you, I saw the bunkers. It's impossible to get through, I can tell you. For that, you need nuclear weapons. It will not work. And I think the Russian army will go forward slowly and slowly, step by step. And if the war lasts longer, for months, they will come up to Kharkiv in the north, and they will get closer to Odessa in the south. Time is working for the Russian Federation.
So, that's the last question. What do you predict for Ukraine and Europe if NATO continues to escalate rather than pursue diplomacy? And how can Russia's perspective be better understood?
It would be very helpful to understand that people in other regions of the world made other experiences and came to other conclusions. But Western politicians don't want to understand that because it's not in their interest. It's an economic question. Western economy, especially the lenders, need new collateral. They need the Ukraine soil, the black earth, to make their own businesses more profitable. And as a result, they will not succeed. And the conclusion of my side is the Ukraine will be divided. The question is, where exactly? If the war will continue for years, probably we will come back to the so-called Curtain line of the Treaty of Versailles, 200 kilometers westward of Kiev. European Union will have to pay the price for this war, and European Union will break up. I don't think that the European Union will have a good future. You see those signs. Kaja Kallas, as the Foreign Secretary of the European Union, tries to block Fico's visit in Moscow, and he has to surround the whole Union. What do you think the countries will do, Hungary and Slovenia, when the cost of the war are up to be paid? They will leave the Union. And the warmongers have to pay the price of their wars. And well, the population of the European Union has to pay the price in the end. So European Union will get the backward of America, of the United States, and the backyard of the Russian Federation as well. Nobody knows the European Union anymore, because the European Union changed its character completely from a peace project to an administration of warmongers. And no one in Western Europe needs that. No one in Western Europe needs Mrs. von der Leyen and Mrs. Kallas and Mrs. Baerbock. They should kicked into the garbage bin of history. But they are in office. They're still in office. And they will continue doing their job. And that's the problem. These are the real destroyers of the European Union. And the United States can, in staking claims, survive much longer. But in the end, the whole West is in the decline. And the big Asian economy of China will come up step by step. And this is, well, from the point of view in Washington, the real enemy. And this is something Donald Trump observed exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And for everybody that will be viewing this, you can see Patrik's X account, his website, and the Amazon link to his book in the description below. And again, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks
and
for inviting me to the show.
If you ever come into Minsk, let us know and I'll show you around.
Thanks very much for the invitation.
Cool. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's live show 132 done. Hope you enjoyed listening to Patrik as much as I enjoyed asking him those questions and listening to his answers. And again, a big thanks to Patrik for coming on. I really appreciated it. Coming up this week, I'll have a show on Wednesday where it will be Belarus-centric show with clips from the 80th anniversary victory parade, the reenactment of a battle in the Great Patriotic War, or World War II as the West calls it, at the Stalin Line, footage from the visits to the Brest Fortress and Nevitz Castle, and I'll be asking our visitor from the UK how his visit was this time and if he's going to come again. Tomorrow there'll be a video special of the hockey game between Belarus and Russia. Belarus won the series. And on Sunday we have a show next Sunday as I have a conversation with Alex White, who lives in China. He has previously been on the show, so subscribe to the channels and you'll be informed when those start. Thanks again for watching. Hit the thumbs up, share the video on your socials, and I'll see you at the next show. Bye.